Within the dazzling realm of ancient Rome, beneath the shining marble pillars and gilded palaces, lay a darker truth that history has frequently overlooked. While we admire Rome's military victories, impressive architecture, and groundbreaking laws, the stories of those who suffered the most to uphold this grandeur are seldom told. Young men were compelled into lives of servitude as companions to the wealthy and influential. These individuals were not simply servants or slaves handling daily chores. They were people caught in a system that exploited their youth, attractiveness, and fragility for the pleasure of Rome's elite. Their experiences uncover a facet of the Roman Empire that disputes our idealized perceptions of this ancient society, revealing the harsh reality of helplessness where power ruled without mercy. Before we explore these neglected tales of endurance and pain, if you appreciate uncovering the hidden chapters of history, please click like and subscribe for more stories like this. Feel free to comment below and share where you are tuning in from. It amazes me that we can delve into these ancient narratives together, bringing together people from around the globe united by curiosity about the past. The Roman attitude toward intimate relationships differed greatly from how we view them today. While today we expect clear lines between willingness and force, Romans had a very different perspective, a complicated system where authority controlled everything existing. At the lowest level of this system were young males, frequently taken from defeated lands or born into slavery, who found themselves forced into positions they never chose. These boys, some barely in their teens, were picked not for their talents or intellect, but for their looks and assumed ability to entertain their owners. They lived in constant doubt, never sure when they would be called upon, what would be demanded of them, or how saying yes or no might impact their chances of survival. The selection procedure was degrading. Wealthy Romans visited slave markets, much like people today attend livestock auctions, scrutinizing potential buys for their physical traits, age, and birthplace. Young men from Greece were especially admired for their supposed sophistication and schooling, while those from Germanic tribes were prized for their light skin and strong build. The buyers had no concern for the fear these youngsters must have felt standing exposed and helpless, as strangers judged their value. Once bought, these concubines became part of households where their lives no longer belonged to them. They were expected to be ready at all times to foresee their master's desires, even before being asked, and to put on a show of eager willingness regardless of their true emotions. The mental strain of this situation was immense. The reality of existence as a male concubine cannot be emphasized enough. Imagine being compelled to smile and show gratitude while undergoing treatment that stripped away every bit of your dignity and independence. The daily life of a male concubine differed greatly depending on the preferences of their master and their social rank. Some lived in splendid accommodations, wore elegant clothing, and were allowed to engage in education and cultural pursuits, yet they always knew that these comforts came with a significant cost. Others existed in conditions barely superior to ordinary slaves, summoned only when their master desired their presence, and then sent back to quarters where privacy was non-existent, personal belongings were forbidden, and any hope for freedom was entirely absent. What made their plight especially heartbreaking was the total absence of legal safeguards or any means to seek justice. While Roman law offered certain protections for citizens and even some rights for slaves, male concubines occupied an uncertain space where the wishes of their master overruled any concern for their health or happiness. They had no access to legal authorities, could not establish meaningful relationships, and were unable to voice their pain without risking severe penalties. The mental manipulation inflicted upon these young men was perhaps even more devastating than the physical conditions of their bondage. Masters frequently used strategies aimed at eroding their resistance and fostering dependence. Occasionally, some concubines were granted special favors or treated with apparent kindness, but this was part of a calculated effort to control them fully. Temporary acts of kindness were given only to be taken away as punishment for supposed offenses. This led to a persistent feeling of anxiety and uncertainty because the individuals never knew if they were currently favored or about to be disciplined. Many rulers intentionally kept their concubines separate from other members of the household to stop them from building friendships or alliances that could provide emotional comfort. This seclusion was especially cruel for young men who had been removed from their families and communities, as it severed any ties to their previous identities or cultural backgrounds. The competitive environment in certain households added yet another level of mental torment. When masters maintained several concubines, they often encouraged rivalry among them for attention and privileges. This tactic prevented any sense of unity among these individuals and fostered a climate filled with constant stress and mistrust. Men who might have found solace through shared experiences were instead pushed to compete for their master's approval, fully aware that losing favor could result in even harsher treatment. The education given to some concubines was also a means of control. Although learning to read, write, and engage in intellectual conversations may appear as opportunities, these skills were mainly taught to make the concubines more amusing companions. They were expected to discuss literature and politics only in ways that pleased their masters. Education served as yet another means to mold them into more ideal companions for their owner's pleasure. Their physical appearance was carefully preserved through rigorous routines that concubines had no option but to obey. They had to engage in regular exercise, adhere to strict diets, and follow grooming habits designed to maintain a youthful and appealing look. Some even underwent cosmetic procedures or surgeries to change their features according to their master's wishes. These treatments were conducted without the benefits of modern medical science or anesthesia, making them both hazardous and painfully intense. The attire and accessories worn by concubines acted as decorations, as well as markers of possession. Masters often took great satisfaction in adorning their partners exquisitely, treating them as living ornaments rather than as human individuals. Ironically, despite being clothed in luxurious fabrics and adorned with precious metals, concubines remained completely powerless underneath their splendid appearance. Travel represented another dimension of their lives that might appear advantageous, but was, in reality, another method of domination. Some concubines followed their masters on journeys to different cities or provinces. However, this mobility was never optional. Essentially, they were movable possessions required to offer the same services wherever they went, adapting to new settings and social demands without resistance. The social structure within Roman households posed further difficulties, especially for males. Concubines, despite their comfortable living conditions, held no genuine position of authority within the household hierarchy. Other slaves often looked down on them, viewing their role as dishonorable, while the free members of the household considered them mere temporary distractions instead of individuals deserving respect or kindness. The consequences for the families left behind were profound. When young men were taken as concubines, their families frequently remained unaware of their fate. Parents might spend many years anxious about whether their sons were alive, never realizing that the boys were caught in situations almost impossible to escape. This separation inflicted particularly harsh pain in cultures where family ties were deeply valued and community support was crucial for survival. Some concubines entered servitude due to debt slavery, where families facing financial collapse were forced to surrender their sons to repay what they owed. These families faced an agonizing dilemma: to watch all their children suffer or to sacrifice one child so the others might survive. The emotional strain on both the families and the captured young men was immense, as everyone understood the sacrifice being made. Very few records remain of concubines trying to flee, but these accounts reveal desperate young men risking everything for even the tiniest hope of freedom. The penalties for unsuccessful attempts were brutal and public, meant to deter others from taking similar risks. Attempts to enforce such punishments happened frequently. They involved not only physical pain, but also public humiliation, as owners sought to display their absolute dominance over those they possessed. Some concubines desperately tried to escape their torment by taking their own lives, yet even this last refuge was often refused. Masters who had spent considerable sums acquiring and supporting their concubines took strict precautions to avoid losing their investments. These measures included constant monitoring and removal of any items that might be used for self-injury. The religious environment in Roman society offered no comfort for these young men. Although Romans revered gods linked to protection and fairness, these divine safeguards clearly did not cover male concubines. Some found refuge in foreign faiths or secretive cults, but even these spiritual outlets had to be hidden because owners controlled every aspect of their concubines' existence, including their religious convictions. The economic worth assigned to concubines fueled a marketplace that perpetuated the capture and sale of young men. Wealthy Romans vied to obtain the most attractive or gifted companions, which raised prices and motivated merchants to keep supplying this demand. The objectification of human beings reached its height in these exchanges, where young men's lives were reduced to mere financial calculations. Specialized training schools were established solely to prepare young men for this harsh reality. Men lived as concubines in a manner similar to gladiators trained in fighting schools for the arena. These establishments were equally ruthless and lucrative. They systematically dismantled the individuality and resistance of their pupils, while instructing them in the skills expected by their future owners. Their education involved not only physical drills, but also mental conditioning, aimed at producing obedient and appealing companions. The age at which boys were brought into this life varied widely, yet many were mere children when their destinies were decided. The influence of growing up under such harsh conditions is immense. These boys never had the chance to experience normal relationships, explore personal interests, or grasp what healthy human connections should be like. Treatment of concubines differed regionally, reflecting the varied cultures within the Roman Empire, but none of these distinctions truly ensured their protection or respect. In some areas, local traditions allowed slightly improved circumstances, while in others, the cruelty was intensified. Regardless of the place, the essential absence of freedom and independence remained unchanged. The end of a concubine's usefulness was another brutal reality. Unlike other enslaved individuals who could potentially gain or buy freedom, concubines who lost their physical allure were frequently abandoned with no means, training, or support for survival. Some masters abandoned their elderly companions without hesitation, while others transferred them to households of lower rank, where conditions were frequently harsher. The few instances of concubines who succeeded in freeing themselves and achieving a degree of success later in life stand out because they were so rare. These women often had to entirely reshape their identities, conceal their histories, and cope with the psychological harm inflicted by their previous ordeals. Their achievements are inspiring, but also underscore how extraordinary it was for anyone to escape this oppressive system unscathed. Medical assistance for concubines was not provided out of kindness, but rather to preserve their worth as possessions. Masters sought to maintain their investments in good health and attractiveness, so medical care was given when needed. However, this attention was focused solely on appearance and functionality, disregarding mental health or any lasting physical consequences. The acceptance of this practice among the Roman elite reflects much about the ethical standards of ancient Rome. Although Romans celebrated ideals such as honor, duty, and virtue, these principles applied exclusively to free citizens of certain social rank. The plight of concubines was deemed irrelevant to moral judgment, revealing how thoroughly they had been stripped of humanity in Roman culture. Some concubines even developed what could now be interpreted as psychological conditions due to their treatment. These behaviors can be understood as survival tactics. Learning to interpret their owners' moods, predict their wants, and navigate the complicated social networks within their households was essential. While these abilities helped them avoid the harshest punishments, they also demanded that they become skilled performers, constantly displaying satisfaction and thankfulness while hiding their true emotions. The seasonal rhythms of Roman social life influenced the lives of concubines as well. During important festivals and events, they were often obliged to take part in elaborate entertainments, whereas quieter times might bring brief moments of respite from constant scrutiny. Yet even in these quieter intervals, anxiety lingered about when they might be called upon again. Communication between concubines or slaves was frequently limited. However, when possible, these young men created their own support networks and means of exchanging information. They mastered subtle gestures and coded signals to warn each other about their master's moods or to provide comfort during especially tough moments. Although these connections had to remain secret, they offered vital emotional support in an otherwise lonely existence. The effects of this system went beyond those directly affected and reached into Roman society at large. The widespread acceptance of treating people as objects for pleasure fostered a culture of exploitation and dehumanization. This cultural norm made it easier for Romans to rationalize such unjust treatment. Various forms of cruelty and oppression existed, ranging from gladiator fights to the harsh suppression of slave uprisings. Archaeological discoveries offer fleeting insights into the lives of these forgotten individuals. Items uncovered in affluent Roman homes include tools likely employed to control or watch over concubines, as well as personal belongings that reveal aspects of their everyday existence. Yet most tangible proof of their presence has vanished with time, much like their voices were silenced during their lives. References to male concubines in Roman literature tend to be brief and indirect, showing the author's intent to acknowledge these relationships without exposing their darker realities. Between the lines of these writings, however, one can discern the harsh truth of lives marked by helplessness and exploitation. Periods of transition when concubines were sold from one owner to another were especially distressing, since they faced the uncertainty of new dwellings, varying demands, and unpredictable degrees of cruelty or kindness. Each change meant adapting anew to survive in a strange place, while preserving the mental defenses that had kept them alive before. Some owners viewed their concubines as temporary pleasures, quickly growing bored and either selling them off or reducing their status to that of common household slaves. Others formed longer attachments which, although still deeply exploitative, suggested a somewhat different dynamic within this grim framework. The situation offered neither genuine security nor stability, since the fate of concubines was entirely subject to their masters' changing desires. Wealthy Romans frequently moved throughout the year between their city homes and country estates, which meant that many concubines never settled in one place, but lived constantly shifting between various environments and social circles. This relentless need to adjust demanded immense mental resilience, yet it prevented them from creating strong connections with either people or locations. Concubines received training in music, poetry, and refined conversation, which created a painful paradox. They were educated to appreciate and understand beauty and culture, but were denied any chance to produce or influence these artistic fields themselves. Instead, they served as living vessels of artistic knowledge and skill, always performing for others' pleasure rather than their own creative expression. Physical conditioning was intended to preserve their attractiveness for their masters, but these regimes could be harsh and grueling. Young men had no option but to submit to the exercise routines, strict diets, or bodily alterations their masters insisted on, regardless of the toll on their bodies or minds. Roman public celebrations and private festivities added further strain, as concubines were often required to take part in elaborate performances and exclusive events, increasing the demands placed on them at all times. Although these gatherings might appear festive on the surface, for the concubines involved, they signified further chances for degradation and exploitation. The formation of personal connections between concubines and other members of the household was made complex by the uncertain nature of their position. Even if they experienced a life of relative comfort, everyone knew that their standing depended entirely on their master's approval, making true friendship or love nearly unattainable. The extensive trade networks that supplied young men to serve as concubines extended throughout the entire Mediterranean region and beyond. This system encouraged conflicts, abductions, and debt slavery as traders worked to fulfill the demands of affluent Roman families. The human toll of sustaining this network was vast, impacting not just the direct victims, but whole communities and societies. Training and conditioning concubines involved more than teaching specific skills. It also entailed psychological manipulation, aimed at dismantling their resistance and fostering dependence. Masters and their agents became skilled at finding and exploiting mental vulnerabilities through methods that would today be recognized as deliberate abuse. The clothing and adornments worn by concubines had multiple functions beyond decoration. They indicated their rank, showcased their master's riches and taste, and acted as constant symbols of their lack of freedom. Even their presence, physical appearance, was beyond their control as well. The medical and grooming procedures forced upon concubines were frequently painful, risky, or caused lasting disfigurement. These treatments occurred without any concern for the concubine's consent or comfort, with their bodies viewed merely as objects to be altered according to their owner's desires. The psychological consequences of growing up or spending formative years in such environments inflicted deep emotional wounds that influenced all areas of these young men's lives. They never had a chance to learn about consent, personal freedom, or healthy relationships, making it incredibly challenging to heal, even if they eventually gained liberty. The enforced social isolation many concubines experienced denied them the opportunity to develop social skills or build supportive networks that could have aided in their survival or escape. This separation was often intentional, as masters sought to prevent their possessions from forming alliances or obtaining any external help. Economic calculations dictated concubines' fates, reducing them to mere monetary figures, with prices varying depending on factors such as age, looks, skills, and background. This commodification made it easier for masters to justify viewing them as disposable possessions instead of as human beings entitled to fundamental dignity and respect. The normalization of such exploitation and dehumanization left a profound impact on Roman society. The impact extended well beyond those directly affected. A society willing to tolerate the systematic mistreatment of vulnerable young men was also ready to accept other forms of cruelty and injustice, which fueled a wider pattern of oppression that defined much of Roman history. The rare accounts of resistance and rebellion among concubines reveal the drastic actions some undertook to reclaim their humanity and self-respect. These rebellious acts, though often unsuccessful and harshly punished, prove that the human spirit could not be entirely broken even in the harshest conditions. The religious and philosophical beliefs of Rome offered little real protection or solace for these individuals. While Romans engaged in debates about ethics and moral values, they seemingly ignored the contradiction between those noble ideals and the routine exploitation of defenseless young men. The seasonal cycles of Roman social life established predictable periods when concubines faced increased demands on their time and energy. This meant that even in quieter intervals, they lived with the anticipation of more strenuous and taxing times ahead. The consequences of this system on the families and communities from which concubines were taken must not be underestimated. The removal of young men for this purpose impacted not only the direct victims, but also entire social networks, contributing to the broader societal disruption. The widespread turmoil and distress brought about by Roman expansion and exploitation were immense. The training and conditioning of concubines relied on meticulous strategies aimed at dismantling their mental resistance and enforcing submission. These approaches were perfected through many generations, resulting in a system both highly efficient and deeply damaging to those subjected to it. Within Roman law, concubines had no genuine protection, being regarded as possessions rather than individuals with rights. This legal invisibility rendered their anguish unseen, enabling masters to behave without any accountability, while society deliberately ignored their plight. Economic motivations perpetuated this exploitative cycle, as profits gained from the human trade encouraged the ongoing capture and mistreatment of young men. Ending this vicious loop would have demanded profound shifts in Roman culture and principles, changes that unfortunately never transpired. The physical and mental conditioning forced upon concubines aimed to ensure complete obedience, but the human toll was staggering. These young men were systematically deprived of their independence, dignity, and identity, often never regaining these fundamental parts of their being, even if they eventually obtained freedom. Reflecting on these overlooked tales of hardship and endurance, we must acknowledge that behind every historical figure lies a true individual whose suffering cannot be forgotten. They came with hopes, fears, and dreams that were never given the chance to grow. The concubines of ancient Rome were not mere footnotes in history, but individuals whose lives expose crucial truths about authority, abuse, and human endurance. Their narratives urge us to look beyond the marble facades and golden artifacts of ancient Rome, to understand the human suffering behind the splendor of this civilization. They serve as a powerful reminder that historical advancements often demanded a toll from the most defenseless members of society, and that the cost of wealth and influence was frequently borne by those without any power to resist. The systematic exploitation they endured reveals how easily societies can accept and embed cruelty when it benefits those in control. The Romans' capacity to uphold complex philosophical and legal frameworks while managing this extensive human trafficking operation highlights how moral reasoning can be applied selectively to protect existing hierarchies. These young men's stories also shed light on the extraordinary strength of the human spirit. Although they endured conditions meant to completely crush them, many discovered ways to preserve a sense of identity and pride. Their subtle acts of defiance, moments of solidarity with others, and fierce will to survive are testimonies to humanity's victory over systematic dehumanization. Delving into their experiences enables us to identify recurring patterns of injustice in both past and present societies. Exploitation and abuse persist in our era. Although the specific ways these injustices manifest may have transformed, the fundamental forces of power imbalance, vulnerability, and systemic oppression continue to hold true. The experiences of those affected act as a stark warning about the consequences when societies permit the powerful to treat others merely as objects for their own gain and desire. The silence that has long surrounded these narratives reveals our ongoing unease with fully acknowledging historical wrongs. By restoring these neglected voices to our collective awareness, we pay tribute to their memory and reaffirm our responsibility to stop such widespread abuse from happening again. The concubines of ancient Rome lived and died under conditions no person should ever face. Their stories deserve to be recalled not as sensationalized historical tidbits, but as profound accounts of human suffering and strength. Remembering their plight means recognizing their humanity and pledging to create a world where such exploitation cannot occur. Their legacy challenges us to scrutinize how our own society treats its most vulnerable, and to consider what future generations might uncover about the injustices we allow or overlook today. The difficult questions raised by their narratives about authority, consent, and human dignity are just as urgent now as they were 2,000 years ago. Ultimately, the dreadful existence endured by these women demands that we confront these issues with courage and determination. A male concubine in the Roman Empire stands as a powerful symbol, revealing that some of the most remarkable accomplishments of civilization were built upon deeply disturbing acts of cruelty. By recognizing and accepting this reality, we pay tribute to those who endured immense suffering. This awareness calls us to dedicate ourselves to preventing such widespread dehumanization from ever becoming an unseen cost of advancement and wealth again. Through this reflection, we connect the progress of human history with the responsibility